Hello and welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca and today I'm actually on my way to a car show. There's a little local show not too far from us, so I'm actually driving Peggy to my parents' house and then I'm actually swapping over to Lulu because we're on the singer stand for the day at the local show. So Peggy's getting a little bit of a run this morning and then a nice rest after our holiday this week, which is what I'm actually going to be talking about on today's podcast. So if you follow me on any of the social media that I've got, so I'm on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook with the Passenger Seat Podcast, you'll know that we've been away for the past week or so in the Lake District. We have kind of a 1 week holiday every year, me and my partner, and we take Peggy as our car and kind of pick an area of the country to go and explore. 2 years ago, the first year that we had Peggy, it was Wales. Last year, obviously, we did the New Forest, Hampshire, and kind of all in that area. And this year, we chose the Lake District. We moved the holiday a little bit further forward this year to try and have a little bit cooler weather because it was so incredibly hot last year when we went, and that worked quite well for us. It meant that we weren't so warm driving there and back, and we had kind of a pleasant time in the sun, but we weren't absolutely roasting, so that was quite nice. So we set off on Friday the 1st. It was going to be about 243 miles, I think it was, for us on the way there. Jamie took the first part of the drive and he drove Peggy up the A1 from kind of Peterborough area where we're based all the way up to Ferrybridge services, and reasonably no problems there, and that was actually the longest that he'd ever kind of driven a car for constantly outside of kind of lessons and things like that when he used to have longer lessons. So did really well. We got to Ferrybridge and had a break, stretch of our legs, and a swap of drivers before we hit the M62, and we went along the M62 for a little bit. But when I'd been planning this trip as to where we were going to go up the country, I'd noticed that we were going to go quite close to Halifax, probably the closest to Halifax that we'd ever go with most of our trips. And a few years ago, when I was looking for kind of pictures of Peggy online before I'd owned her, I'd come across these pictures of her at a little garage there that used to be called Little Garage Classics, and I sent a load of emails trying to work out kind of who had taken the photos and managed to track all that down, and I spoke about that in the podcast about Peggy's history. And given that we were being so close, I thought it'd be really nice to have another brief stop off there at the kind of garage where the photos had been taken and recreate those photos. And it was, so I printed off the photos from online and I was able to kind of do a little comparison shot, which I'll insert here if you're watching on the YouTube. And it was really nice, and it was oddly kind of emotional to think that those photos were taken in, I think, 2016 or 17, and she's still going, still kind of not had any huge major work. She's probably due a little bit of body work in the not too distant future, but she was still kind of as she was then, and a little bit improved in places, I think, which was quite nice. We then kind of looked at where the route suggestions were for us to carry on up to the Lake District, and saw that there was kind of two that were on big main motorways and one that was kind of going to be a little bit more scenic across some of the Yorkshire Dales and then up through some little towns and villages and things. So we went for that option, and quite quickly realised why it was kind of the third option, as it was some quite steep hills. We ended up on a one-track road in the middle of a pretty rainy situation, over a great many steep hills, and it was very scenic, but it was not a very smooth road at all. We were banging and clanging all over the place, and it was certainly not the most peaceful hill-based journey that we did that holiday. But we came down from there, went through some lovely little towns and some back roads and things like that, and eventually got to our hotel, which was based very close to Lake Windermere, for about, I think it was about 5 o'clock. We'd taken our time. We'd obviously had 2 stops, and we'd set off around 10, so a reasonably gentle journey up there, and 243 miles behind us with no issues really. We unpacked Peggy, checked into the room and everything, and then decided that we could do with a stretch of our legs from the driving, so walked into the nearby Windermere for some dinner. And we went to a place that I think was called Brown Sugar, and sat up on their balcony, and it was a great position for sitting there and watching cars go past, watching people go past, watching dogs go past. There was quite a theme to the holiday of watching dogs and cars, and we managed to kind of spot a few interesting number plates and things whilst we were enjoying our evening meal. As we got to the end of our meal, the rain came, and I hadn't brought a raincoat because it had been lovely weather when we left, so it was quite a soggy walk back to our hotel, to then dry off and get ready for the next day. Saturday, I knew that we wanted to go to the Lakeland Motor Museum at some point during our trip, and whilst Jamie had been driving the day before, I'd been looking on their social media and things, and realised that Saturday was the first Saturday of the month, and they have a meet there for kind of anybody to come and take part in, right outside the museum, so you get kind of nice prime parking, and it meant that there'd be loads of other cars for us to look at as well as the museum, so it'd be quite a fun extra kind of piece to visiting the museum. So we decided that we would do that first thing Saturday morning. So we drove over, really lovely drive, basically along the edge of Lake Windermere, and we're reasonably early, so got a really nice spot under some trees with kind of near their caravan and things that they've got in the car park, and started wandering around, filming some bits, taking some photos, and the gentleman who was kind of arranging everyone into the parking was Chris, and he spotted us filming and taking photographs, and came over and had a chat and asked kind of what it was that we were up to, and I said that I do the podcast, and I was quite excited to hear that he'd actually heard of the podcast, and so offered us to kind of go around the museum on kind of compliments of the museum. So I'm actually going to do a whole separate podcast about the museum and the meet, because it was really fantastic. I loved the museum. It was really nicely laid out. I had a lot of fun kind of spotting lots of the little tiny bits that were kind of hidden away in sections of the museum, and yeah, it was just a really nice, I mean, we got there at 10 for opening. We probably didn't get into the museum until 11 after walking around all of the things outside. And then, and also we had some really lovely conversations with some of the owners as well. It was really nice how welcoming everyone was to us, having kind of basically just turned up, when I know that there's quite a few regulars that go to it. And yeah, we had some really nice conversations with a few of the owners as well. And then went round the museum. I spent so long in the museum, and I'll tell you all about that in that separate podcast that's coming. Then we went to the cafe and had a really nice kind of drink and a little snack before we went around the Bluebird exhibition, which was great. And then kind of took a few more photos of Peggy in front of the museum before we headed off. And we weren't gone really before 2 o'clock. We'd really spent a good amount of time there. It was well worth heading over, and it would have been definitely worth the ticket price, but as it was, I ended up spending the ticket price and some in the gift shop, so bonus there really. When we finished there at 2 o'clock, we decided to head up to Bowness on Windermere and have a walk round there, a walk round by the kind of lakeside down there and some of the shops. I'm a big Beatrix Potter fan because of kind of it being a big part of growing up for me, because my Grans was a big fan of it. And so I really enjoyed looking around lots of the little Beatrix Potter shops, but also in Bowness and Windermere was weirdly the first of 2 Christmas shops that we went into, and that was really nice. Even though it was absolutely roasting outside, we enjoyed a little walk around the Christmas shop for sure. So we spent a good couple of hours walking around there and enjoying kind of sitting by the lake and dog watching again. And then we found a really nice Thai restaurant. So we had our evening meal at that before we headed back to the room and kind of recovered from what had been really quite a busy day. Sunday was a little bit more chill. We had kind of a lazier start to the day. I went in the hotel's pool for a little bit, and then we headed off around lunchtime to Ambleside, which is kind of the opposite direction to everything that we'd done the day before. Whilst we've been sat watching the boats on the lake and things, Jamie had decided that we should hire one of the little self-driven boats for a little bit of time on the Sunday, but wanted to do it from Ambleside because Windermere is so busy and so crowded. So we thought Ambleside would be a bit more of an easy drive, less things to crash into, and things like that. So we booked that for about 3:30, I think it was, on Ambleside lakefront. So we parked up in Ambleside, had a walk around a few of the shops and things, and whilst we were doing that, we noticed a sign for some waterfalls that were only a short walk away from kind of the main town. It was kind of quite a surprising little bonus to Ambleside, and hiked up there. Peggy had been left in the shade in quite a nice little car park that we'd found near the bridge house, and yeah, we had really enjoyed the walk around the waterfalls. It was nice to have kind of a surprise waterfall visit, and we went from there to a little taco place that we'd spotted for some lunch before we went back to Peggy to grab some of the camera equipment that we could set up on the boat and check on her before we walked down to the lakeside and spent an hour out on the lake in a boat. It was huge amounts of fun. I definitely recommend it. A lot of people do the kind of tours and things like that. If you get a map of Windermere, you can kind of work out reasonably well where everything is, what everything is, without having to do a big crowded tour boat or anything. And the self-driven boats were so much fun. Me and Jamie had a lot of fun taking turns at driving, and there was a few speedboats out on the lake at the time, so we kind of used those to get some waves to ride into, to shake the boat about a bit, which was quite fun. But absolutely gorgeous views from the lake from one of the little self-driven boats. We hugely enjoyed that. It was then kind of a hike back to the car, all the way up the kind of hillside of Ambleside to the car. And then we decided that, having spent so much time out on the water, that we really needed fish and chips for tea. So we picked up some fish and chips, and quite near to our hotel there was a viewpoint that you could park up on and watch the kind of lake and the sea. So we parked up there and had a car picnic with our fish and chips, which we regretted enormously the next day when the car absolutely stank of fish and chips. We had to purchase an emergency air freshener to try and overpower the smell a little bit. Thankfully it's all gone, because I had to clean the car out yesterday for a wedding that I was helping a friend out with. And it was a beautiful way to spend the evening, just kind of watching the sun and the lake, eating some fish and chips from my car. The next day I'd found online a kind of instructions for a classic car tour that kind of took you around a lot of the places that you kind of want to tick off having seen in the local area, and things that you want to do. Like, if you've got a car that you're particularly fond of, you might enjoy the prospect of taking it across the Windermere ferry. I certainly did. So we embarked on that. We drove down to the ferry and then were the first cars on the ferry, which was pretty exciting. Got over the other side and we're then on our way up to Beatrix Potter's house, Hilltop. Unfortunately, it had all booked out. I checked the ticket availability the night before, and it was quite a lot of tickets available, so I hadn't booked because I wasn't sure what time we'd make it across on the ferry and things. But it was all booked out, so we kind of drove on and parked up in Hawkshead and booked ourselves tickets for the following day. Before we had a kind of quick drive through Hawkshead, and then it was up to Tarn Howes, which was a somewhat challenging drive, but really beautiful regardless. And we parked up at Tarn Howes, had a walk around some of the lake, and also down to waterfall number 2, which was Tomgill Falls, I think. Really lovely waterfall there, and reasonably easy to get to, and the whole of Tarn Howes was absolutely gorgeous. It was one of my favourite stops that we'd done on the trip over the whole week, because it was just so peaceful. Tarn Howes doesn't have kind of any boats or swimmers or anything allowed on the lake. It is purely for kind of conservation and wildlife, and it was lovely to kind of just sit by the lake for a bit and just watch for wildlife and things. Headed back to Peggy and had a further challenging drive down from Tarn Howes, interrupted briefly by some cows that were thankfully moved on by some very kind walkers who kind of shoe herded them out of the way, and then to Coniston. And obviously we'd been at the Lakeland Motor Museum in their Bluebird experience, and so to sit at Coniston Lake as we did near the car park and just kind of have a cup of tea and a few snacks for our lunch and just look at the lake and try and imagine the Bluebird K7 going across that at the speeds that it did. It was just absolutely mind-blowing. And to kind of think about the kind of history and everything that lake had held for the Campbell family was, really nice way to just kind of sit and take it in with a cup of tea. And then we went from there to Yew Tree Farm, which is now kind of a hotel accommodation rental property kind of thing, but had been used in the film Miss Potter as a dupe for Hilltop for the filming. So I got a picture of Peggy outside there. Interestingly, on the Sunday I'd bought some top trumps in Ambleside, and they used a photo of Yew Tree Farm for Hilltop rather than a photo of Hilltop on the top trump card. So that was quite peculiar. But enjoyed that. But by that time we kind of lost signal a little bit on the kind of instructions for the route that we were supposed to be taking. But we could kind of see where the points were. So we were using that plus the big map, the pictorial map that my dad had got us of the Lake District a little while back, and tried to kind of navigate our way through it. We knew that we had to go up kind of near the Langdale Pikes, and as we did, we kind of thought, right, well, we need to go this way to Great Langdale, and we saw a sign that said Hard Knot Pass, 30% incline, beware. And we were like, right, I remember being told that Hard Knot Pass was incredibly difficult. We don't want to go that way. We don't want to put ourselves through that today. We'll go this way and see if we can get to things this way. If not, we'll kind of try and navigate ourselves onto kind of the next bit. So we went that way, and it was quite pleasant, and we had some lovely kind of drives in between two huge mountains. Beautiful traction of Avant there. So we had a drive there nicely between two huge mountains, and then found ourselves either reversing quite a long way back because the path had got so narrow, or attempting quite an incline beside quite a lot of sheep up this pass. And we decided we'd have a go, so into first, and revved our way up there, and we were kind of wiggling our way around this narrow pass, quite single traffic in a lot of places, not huge passing places, but we weren't coming across too many cars, so it was okay. And it was quite challenging in a lot of places, and we kept joking, wouldn't it be hilarious if we got to the end of this road and at the end of it was that sign that we had decided not to do, and we'd accidentally done Hard Knot Pass. And as it happened, that is indeed what had happened. We had kind of gone the long way round, ended up going backwards through it, or, well, I suppose it's the right way from some directions, and ended up pulling out right next to the sign that we deliberately avoided. So Jamie ran out of the car and grabbed the photo because I couldn't stop laughing. We'd managed it really well. There'd been no issues. Peggy was doing fine. And considering that every other holiday we'd had hills that were just impassable for us, I've clearly got a little bit better at managing hills than I used to. So that was really rewarding. It was then kind of an attempt to get ourselves back on track, realising that, okay, those two directions were not the right one, so we'll take the third option, which did indeed lead us on to the next few stops, which were just some beautiful scenic views, and eventually back to Ambleside, where we parked up, stretched our legs a little bit, and enjoyed a really lovely pizza, and Jamie had a really nice local beer in the tap yard. And then whilst I was sat there, I was kind of looking at a few bits on social media and also the maps, and I realised how close we were to Kirkstone Pass. And given that we'd just kind of successfully, accidentally managed Hard Knot Pass, Kirkstone Pass is supposedly easier. So I said to Jamie, what if we go and do that now, and kind of go up whilst the sun is kind of coming down a little bit, and see it from up there? And he wasn't keen, but I had the car keys, so that's what we did. So we drove up Kirkstone Pass after dinner, parked up for a bit and kind of took in some of the views, drove all the way over it, realised that to get kind of back to the hotel we had to drive back over again. So that's what we did, and I think of all the passes that we end up doing on this holiday, Kirkstone Pass was definitely my favourite. Some really gorgeous views, very reasonable in terms of the challenge level, and generally just a really nice view and quite enjoyable to drive. Had a lot of fun driving on Kirkstone Pass. So that was kind of Monday. Tuesday morning, we obviously had our reservation for Hilltop, so we got the ferry back over again, and actually managed to get one of the people that were taking the payments to grab a photo of us on the ferry, which was quite nice. We were a little bit early for Hilltop, and they're quite strict on when people can get into the car park and things, so we parked up in a car park down near the lake and kind of sat there and wrote some postcards in the car. And a couple came over to us who it turned out were local Morris Minor owners, who had spotted us pull into the car park, and had come over for a chat. I suspect they were hoping to recruit for their local branch, as the lady was the treasurer for the local branch, and they very kindly said that if we were ever in the area again, we'd be more than welcome to come along to their club nights. But it was lovely to kind of have a nice chat with some people about Morris Minors and things whilst we were waiting, and then headed up to Hilltop. Hilltop was a really lovely walk round. Again, having so many memories of Beatrix Potter books and things growing up, it was lovely how they kind of put pictures of her drawings and things next to the parts of the garden and the house, etc., that they had inspired. We had a lovely kind of walk around the house and around the gardens, sat and had a cool drink in the shade from the little cafe that they've got there before heading on to Levens Hall. Now, Levens Hall was a place that I had kind of realised was in the area thanks to a really old copy of the Singer Owners Club magazine that I'd recently got hold of from the National Weekend. It was actually the second National Weekend that I had attended on the front cover, but the first one I had attended in a Singer. And on the front cover you could see my dad's car in Levens Hall, so along with all the other kind of cars that were there. So we decided to go along to there next. Had entrance to the gardens and the house, so we went in that house first and enjoyed a walk round in the house. Not any footage or anything of in there because they don't allow photography, but there was some really interesting pieces of information and photos and things like that that we really enjoyed. And then we went out into the gardens, and the gardens were really the best part. We really enjoyed walking around the kind of topiaries and things like that in the gardens, and making the most out of what was a really lovely day of sunshine. But regardless of that, we were kind of all done by about 3 o'clock, and we noticed that we were really close to Kendal, so we thought we'd pop in and see kind of what was there. It wasn't a great deal. We enjoyed another Christmas shop. I managed to post my postcards and have a walk around a lovely little vintage clothing store. But other than that, we didn't find a huge lot. I don't know if it was because of a weekday or whatever. But we had managed to get parked up in a lovely covered over car park next to a very lovely, well-used Volvo that had unfortunately lost its headlight wipers. But we managed to get a nice picture of Peggy next to it, which was quite nice. And Peggy was lovely and cool, thanks to it being a covered car park, when we came back to her to head to Windermere for a burrito shop that we had spotted earlier in the holiday, which was called Bandito Burrito, and had the most amazing burritos there out in the sunshine on their kind of patio area, and tried a load of their hot sauces and things as well before we headed back to the hotel room. The next day I had planned out a route that meant that we were going to hit 3 waterfalls and 3 passes. So we set off up through Ambleside towards Keswick, along some really scenic, beautiful roads, and then eventually came around the bottom of Derwent Water to hit our first waterfall, which was Leodore Falls. It was quite a challenging waterfall to get to, but really beautiful and really hidden away behind a hotel that had named itself after the waterfalls. But had been a kind of lovely drive over, and then we drove on from there through Honister Pass, and it was windy, it was rainy, but you kind of eventually climb your way up there through very windy, steep roads, and the views are incredible, even on a cloudy, windy day. And we parked up to give Peggy a bit of a break to have a hot drink because we were a little bit cold. I'd only got shorts for the day and it was quite windy and rainy, and to have a wander around kind of the little slate mine shop and things that they've got set up there, which was really interesting. And yeah, it was just gorgeous to kind of stand at the top of where kind of they'd got the shop and look down into the rest of the pass. And that's what we drove through next, and it was quite enjoyable, really kind of lovely views, and really fun to drive. So out of the 2 passes, I'd recommend Honister and Kirkstone to drive. The next pass was Newlands Pass to get up to Mossforce Waterfall, and that was very challenging, very steep. I can't even remember what the warning was for that one, but we made it to the top, and you kind of drive around this corner and you can see the waterfall from where you park your car. So I managed to get kind of one of my favourite photos of kind of Peggy next to a waterfall in the Lake District, up a very difficult hill that we'd managed. And as we had pulled in and parked up from the other direction, a couple had arrived on a bike, on their 2 bikes, their bicycles, and we kind of climbed up towards the waterfall at about the same sort of time, and they set themselves up to eat their little picnic up there, and we had a little chat with them because they had fond memories of Morris Minors, and were quite impressed to see one that had made it all the way up. And they asked us quite a few questions, and honestly, at the side of a waterfall, in the Lake District is probably one of the most peculiar places I've had conversations about Morris Miners. But it was certainly quite a view, especially as from where we were sitting, we could see Peggy just sitting in the car park, cutely surrounded by the most beautiful scenery. It was absolutely gorgeous. From there, we kind of carried on across Newlands Pass, and then over kind of the top towards Ullswater, where we stopped for Air of Force, Waterfall, and again, a beautiful drive over there, parked ourselves up. It's just such stunning scenery. It's one of the best places I think I've ever driven. I loved every second of driving, and it wasn't until the next day where I was like, oh gosh, Jamie, do you want to do any driving? And he was like, no, actually I'm enjoying leaning out the window and just watching the scenery from the passenger seat, which suited me just fine. Down past Ullswater, over Kirkstone Pass, and back to our hotel for dinner. And I think that was one of the latest days that we were out. It had been really nice, really well filled, and to hit 3 waterfalls and 3 passes in one day, it was one of our favourite days of the holiday. Thursday was our last day in the Lake District. We hadn't got anything planned, so the night before we'd actually used the Top Trumps pack to work out things that we'd done, and then things that we hadn't done, weren't interested in, and things that we might be interested in, and decided that we would go first thing in the morning to Ray Castle, which was the other side of Windermere to us, and really park up and enjoy a walk around the castle and the grounds. It was actually the place that the Potters stayed for the first time when they visited the Lake District, and what made them fall in love with the Lake District, and I can 100% see why. It was absolutely gorgeous. We spent so much time after we'd walked around the beautiful castle and the restorations that they were carrying out there. We spent so much time just sitting by the lake on the little beachside bit, watching the water, watching kind of things go past. We had the typhoons fly over the top of us a couple of times, not something the Potter family will have experienced, but it was quite exciting. We went for a little walk and managed to find this little stone viewpoint that you could climb up onto, and get kind of right out into the view of Windermere, and we had that to ourselves for a good period of time. A little bit more of a walk, a little drink, and then sit down and watch some more of the lake. It was really gorgeous. And then we headed off to Grasmere to kind of have a walk round there. But yeah, had a lovely time there, managed to find a lovely little gallery that was selling art prints at a very reasonable price, and so we bought one of Kirkstone Pass, which was my favourite pass, and also of Beatrix Potter's house, to put up in our house as kind of a lovely little memento of what is my favourite trip that I think we've ever done, as a three, me, Peggy and Jamie. And yeah, had a lovely day there, and then went back to Bandito Burrito for tea, because it was our favourite place that we'd eaten all holiday, and managed to be the last kind of people that they let eat, because they were closing early on Thursdays, and really enjoyed kind of sitting there out on their patio again, watching kind of cars and things go past. Headed back to the room, packed ourselves up, ready for the trip home the next day. I took the first part of the driving on the way home, and we kind of kept it simple for the drive home. Hit the M6 down, and then the M62 across until we got towards Huddersfield, because we planned to stop off at the carding shed or the All Can Cafe, in Holmfirth for our little kind of halfway stop. Unfortunately, there was some roadworks and things on nearby, so we couldn't get Peggy up close to it for a nice photo, but we did have a lovely wander around all the garages and a kind of watch of them working on some of the cars before we sat down and had a little bit of lunch and an absolutely amazing milkshake, and walk around the kind of displays in the cafe and all the way down to the toilets even, before we got back on our way. And I think it was another 230 something miles on this particular run. Had a lovely drive over some more of Yorkshire as we headed back towards the A1. As we hit the A1, we did a driver swap, and Jamie did the last part of the journey as I was getting quite tired, and it was really quite hot by this point. We'd had a lovely last 2 days of the holiday with sunshine. But yeah, that was our little drive home, and then it was a case of unpacking the car and having a chill time and preparing myself for this weekend, because obviously did my friend's wedding yesterday, and as a favour to her, and then we've got the show today. So I hope you've enjoyed hearing about our little trip. It was absolutely fantastic. If you've got a classic car, I could not recommend more highly taking it to the Lake District, taking it to the Lakeland Museum, and also having some wonderful driving around. You don't have to do the passes, but it's a huge sense of achievement when you do, and hopefully you'll have a fantastic time. Peggy behaved immaculately. I can't believe how well we did, and I've got huge fond memories of the whole trip that I know I'm going to treasure for a really long time. But yeah, I hope you've enjoyed hearing about it and perhaps been inspired to have a week-long holiday somewhere in your classic car. But in the meantime, drive safely and happy motoring.